Kanji scoring the consolation for Switzerland. They actually indicated it was a finishing clinic from the Portuguese. But what tactics did we see during this match? And how were Portugal successful, but Switzerland not, despite using very similar systems? Let's take a quick look. And we'll begin with Portugal in possession. And when Portugal were on the ball, Switzerland defended in a mid-block. And Switzerland's defensive shape could vary between a 4-2-3-1, but more commonly they opted for back three defensive shapes. And that was with Rodriguez tucking into left centre-back, Fernandes to right wing-back, and Vargas as the left wing-back. Whilst the midfield could shift between being more of a genuine flat three, with Shaqiri and Mbolo being the front two, or a 2 and a 1 with the attacking midfielder looking to tie up a midfielder. And because Switzerland would have had a 2 versus 2 against the centre-back in these situations, Carvalho often dropped deep to be the third centre-back, so that they always had that 3 versus 2 advantage, converting Dalot and Guerreiro into wing-backs, and they were quite aggressive, pushing high and wide as early as they could for the most part, which would then allow Fernandes and João Felix off the left-hand side to operate more as free eights. And when Carvalho dropped deep, he tended to take a midfielder with him, with Bernardo Silva and Otavio being the double pivot left behind. And as you can see, that meant that Switzerland were often defending in man-to-man situations, which is a very difficult system to pull off, as it means you essentially have to win all your man-to-man battles, otherwise you'll be a man down somewhere on the pitch. In addition, it also makes the individual quality of the attackers more important, as your defender has to win those 1 versus 1s. Carvalho is now the centre-back, and an extra midfielder is committed to him, meaning that it's a 3 versus 3 situation. And in response, it's become a man-to-man situation all around the pitch, which is a seriously dangerous position for Switzerland. And Portugal were able to immediately manipulate the backline of Switzerland because of these man-to-man situations. And the responsibility for doing so fell on Fernandes and Felix either side. So, with the wing-backs being extremely aggressive and forcing Switzerland's own wing-backs much deeper, we began to see both Fernandes and Felix comfortable to drop into these positions. So, these 1 versus 1 situations meant that if the centre-back remained deep, the free 8 would be able to get on the ball. And on the right-hand side, with this space, Fernandes could use his passing ability, but on the left-hand side, with this space, Felix could use his dribbling ability to get on the ball and have momentum and a run on the centre-backs as he advanced. So, when they did drop, we did see the wider centre-backs having to come towards the man, which would leave a massive gap in defence for a man to potentially make a run, or a midfielder now had to drop deeper to cover, now affecting their integrity in the central region. So here, it's Fernandes who's dropped deeper, and that's Rodriguez that's been drawn out of position to look to cover him. So now Switzerland have had to shift to a back 4. And the shape was most dangerous down the left-hand side for Portugal, where, with Guerreiro high, would often see Felix drop into this position, and Akanji had to be aggressive in following his man deeper, leaving this gaping hole. So Guerreiro could initially show short, before looking to run in behind to make the most of the space. And this does even lead to a goal. João Felix is dropping deep, and Akanji is drawn towards him. And because everything was man-to-man as we discussed, there is a massive gap left in behind, the space vacated by Akanji and Fernandes. Guerreiro makes the run, but initially doesn't get the ball. But running the play on, he eventually gets a bunch of space, with both Fernandes and Akanji drawn way out of position. And we see it once again in the build-up here, with the Portuguese man dropping deep, drawing the wing back towards him. Akanji is then in a man-to-man situation, and when he doesn't win the ball, Guerreiro has acres of space to attack behind both Fernandes and Akanji, eventually leading to the ball being played through to him and an outstanding finish. But the interesting thing is that Switzerland used a similar system in possession, so how did Portugal manage to avoid the same pitfalls? For the most part, Switzerland built up with a back 3, with Rodriguez being the left centre-back, and Vargas and Fernandes being extremely aggressive as the wing-backs. This then allowed Mbolo to be the man up front, often joined by another man in the left half space. So, their shape was basically a 3-2-5, much like Portugal. A back 3, a rough double pivot, followed by a front 5 higher up. But when we saw Switzerland, when defending, shifting to a back 5, making everything man-to-man, Portugal stuck with their back 4 and accepted that there would be a man down in the back line, and instead looked to defend in a 4-2-3-1. That often looked like this. And at times, Switzerland would drop Xhaka in during the build-up, and that would be the opportunity for Silva to man-mark him. But the role of the wingers was also important, as they didn't stay out wide, and instead looked to close down the wider centre-backs, creating somewhat of a front 3. So knowing that they were a man down in the backline, they looked to effectively make the pitch smaller. And this was by first applying pressure onto the centre-backs so that they couldn't play tougher progressive passes through the centre, and instead, the easy outlet was often to the wing-back. But in these situations, the fullback would have time to easily come across to cover, backed up by the rest of the back four. So here we see just that, with Silva looking to tie up Xhaka, and Felix, as well as Fernandes, pressing the wider centre-backs. This press is the trigger for Dalot to go and press his man out wide. So effectively, Switzerland are being forced towards one side of the pitch. But these situations meant that Portugal were accepting that Fernandes would often be free on the right-hand side, and they were hoping that the pressure from their forwards high up would make this switch too difficult to play. However, there were still several times where Switzerland were able to enact the switch to Fernandes and he got into quite dangerous positions, but just couldn't make it count. So here you see a similar situation with Portugal using a man-to-man press higher up. And we see Fernandes is free on the near side but is not found. And on the transition, having their wingers central rather than back deep